Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another RBC Disruptors. We hold this conversation every month on different themes in the economy and in society, and today we're talking about ag tech and how technology is changing farming, from the farm gate to how it's processed and how food is shipped and consumed around the world. And we're so lucky to have three extraordinary entrepreneurs with us here today to talk about ag tech. I'll introduce Murad Al-Khatib, Kim Keller, and Ian Meyer in a moment, but let me also remind you that we're on WebEx, and if you have questions, please share them using the chat button. But welcome all three of you to RBC Disruptors. You're all from Saskatchewan, so thanks for including us in this conversation. Murad Al-Khatib, you all know, he's one of the great business leaders of Saskatchewan, president and CEO of AGT Food Ingredients, which has become the world's largest vertically integrated supply chain in the sector for lentils, chickpeas, and peas. Today, AGT employs over 2,000 people and exports 23% of the world's trade in lentils. That's fantastic. Murad was recently awarded the EY World Entrepreneur of the Year. And I discovered he's only the second Canadian to receive that award. The first was a guy named Guy Laliberté of Cirque du Soleil. So pretty great company. Murad, congratulations on that. And welcome to RBC Disruptors. Maybe I can start with you, and then I'll turn to the others and introduce them as well. You see a lot all over the farming world and all over the world. What's the biggest challenge of technology that you're seeing today in farming?
You know, I think that what we're seeing now is, you know, we've really set a strong base, you know, for technology at the farm gate level. But I think that, you know, the challenge that we're facing now is, you know, understanding exactly what we do need, you know, in terms of data, in terms of collection methods, and how do we really integrate in, you know, the advances in technology that we're seeing. You know, the days of, you know, our industry where, you know, if you think about the billions of dollars of capital that are being risked every year, you know, to grow a crop in this province and in this country, you know, not to use the technology that's actually at our fingertips now. You know, we send people out to fields to measure square meters and count plants and pods and try and estimate yield. Well, the technology is now here where drones are going to be able to, you know, scan all of the farmland. Satellites and satellite imagery are going to track vegetative growth. You know, the farms are already equipped with sensors and data collection, and our ability to synthesize that and to put it into a system, John, where predictive analytics are going to be able to tell us with a very high confidence level interval that, you know, this is what we are expecting for yield. So we can plan logistics systems. We can have predictability in terms of, you know, the crop size and you know, all of these things I think are going to really help, you know, boost our productivity. And if we don't turn around and embrace technology, I think that, you know, we can't compete, or we don't want to compete as the lowest common denominator commodity supplier, because our farmers are you know, needing to earn a return on their capital.
So we're going to come back to this point, I think, over and over again about how we need to move up the value chain. And one of the challenges is going to be with the farmer. And Kim, I want to draw you into this point about how ready Canadian farmers and Saskatchewan farmers in particular are for these investments, both financially as well as intellectually, that they need to make in technology. Kim is the co-founder of Farm at Hand. It's a free cloud-based app that allows users to manage entire farming operations from seed to sale on their devices. You've got a device there, or maybe they're using their phones. But she's more than a tech entrepreneur. Kim grew up on a farm, and she returned to farming in her adult life. So she's one of those rare breed who understands both the soil and software. But Kim, when it comes to technology, you get around to a lot of farms. You're a farmer yourself, as I mentioned. How ready and able are Canadian farmers for this revolution that we're starting to see?
Right. Well, I think as farmers, we embrace a lot of technology in our everyday life, from the equipment that we use and the inputs that we use. And now we're just starting to get to, say, smartphone technology and how that applies to our farm. When we started Farm at Hand in 2012, when we launched it, ag tech wasn't a thing, and there wasn't really any apps for farmers to use. And as we look now, 5 years later, we're getting to a point where there are a lot of different platforms for farmers to utilize, and we are seeing an uptake in that. However, the biggest competitor to all of these software platforms is still pen and paper. And I think that that's something that we need to address, and maybe that comes back to the usability of a lot of these software platforms, and they aren't necessarily built for the farmer. When we built Farm at Hand, I was pretty lucky. I was the farmer, so I understood what they needed, and I also had the experience of working next to the developers and the designers at Farm at Hand. And lots of times that manifested itself in the simplest things, like when we did designing of the program and the size of font and the spacing of buttons. We live by a design mantra of big fingers and bad eyes. So I think it's really taking into account some of those.
Was that what the business model was called?
It was pretty close to that. So I think it really comes down to the usability of these platforms and how they actually translate into how the farmer is actually using them, and that will drive that uptake.
So we've got, as Murad said, this enormous opportunity with data all around us, but farming is full of data. Accessing it by the phone or by your mobile device, work in progress, and we'll get back to some of the reasons for that. But Ian, maybe we can speak to, or you can speak to some of the challenges that you're seeing in your world. Ian Meyer is our final guest. He's the CEO and co-founder of Agri-Business. It's a Saskatoon-based ag tech company that connects farm equipment with smartphones and other mobile devices using cloud connectivity. Ian's also just come back from Germany, if I'm not mistaken, and would love your insights on what you're seeing and hearing in overseas markets, especially in Europe. But Ian, first tell us what kind of problem you're trying to solve with your apps.
So I think it kind of speaks to what Kim was talking about, the whole usability problem. There's a lot of technology that just doesn't get used by farmers because it's not easy enough and they're busy, they need to get the crop off. So we try to focus on making products that fit into the workflow of the farmer instead of imposing one on them, and kind of just get out of the way and let the farmer do their job. And the way that we've done that is by leveraging mobile devices, because I don't think it's the only solution to usability, but it happens to be a device that everybody already knows how to use. So it kind of avoids that learning curve from training somebody on a complicated new piece of technology.
One of the great challenges of, and I want to stick with you, Ian, for this, one of the great challenges of technology is even when people adapt it, they don't always innovate with it. They don't use it to change their business processes or to even approach new business lines. What are you seeing to be the biggest challenges and opportunities for producers on that front?
Well, I think it's a comfort thing, and even with our product, we sell to a broad range of growers. They might be 70,000 acres. They might be, a 600-acre corn farmer in Iowa. And I think each one will adopt the technology at their own pace, and we'll see that range where people are not using nearly the capability of our software, and other ones you can't do enough for them because they want to do everything. And so I think it's not imposing a complicated solution, letting them use it at their pace, and then every year they'll try a little more and a little more. People are resistant to change. There's innovators who love the change, but most people aren't in that category, and farmers are no different.
Sure. And of course, entrepreneurs or innovators in any space are not working in isolation. It's not just about the producer and the technology. It's about what we call the ecosystem. Saskatchewan's got a great ag ecosystem, has for generations, but an opportunity now to take it to a much higher level. And Murad, I want to turn to you to talk a bit about the supercluster proposal, because this is a proposal that's on the table. If you're not familiar with it, the federal government has launched a competition for 4 or 5 superclusters to be established around the country. They're investing $950 million, I think it is, in these 4 or 5 superclusters. They're down to, from 50 entrants, down to 9 finalists. Saskatchewan is one of them, so congratulations, Murad, on leading that effort. And the proposal is really exciting. I'll let you talk about the details of it, but it's really about bringing large companies, entrepreneurs, investors, and scientists, academics, together to create something that they couldn't create on their own. So, Murad, what's the vision of the supercluster? If Saskatchewan was to get it 10, 20 years from now, what would it lead to?
Well, I think that one of the things we've done very effectively is, Saskatchewan is leading the protein, innovation industry cluster. And, we've taken it as a base, to kind of, refocus. I mean, when I was growing up in Davidson as a child, we always talked about how we were the breadbasket, of the world. And I think that, today the reality is, John, that we need to transform ourselves into a protein hub. And, if I look at, the protein highway, this has to be the first stop. And, we want to figure out how we take that protein highway and we want to link it to the Silk Road in Asia. Because I think that's really the opportunity for us is to, take Saskatchewan base, to be very clear, the Protein Innovations Cluster is a pan-Canadian initiative. So we have very strong partnership from Manitoba, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. And I think that, what we will try and do in that is we will attempt to look at the cropping rotation and take a look at how do we move up value and monetize protein streams. And then how do we deal with the co-products? Because every time we produce protein, we're actually dealing with things like starch and fiber and other things. And I think that, the opportunity to produce food products, food ingredients, feed products, bio-industrial applications of agricultural products, we don't want to be subject in this province to the geopolitical, will of food policy in places like India and duties and these kinds of things. We want to get into, food and value-added production. And so, this is all about clustering and bringing those large companies, small companies, and scientists all together and, create synergies. And so we're expecting that the program will end up successful, where we'll end up with $250 million from the federal government, and roughly $500 million of private sector money will go in. I think it'll be great for the small enterprises, business, and also for the farm gate.
Where does that money go?
It'll actually go into a organization which we're calling Protein Industries Canada, which will have offices, on a pan-Western basis, and there will be projects implemented by private sector in partnership with each other. And I think there's some very interesting technology elements of it. We're going to be touching things like blockchain, data collection, data hubs, and the utilization of the farm gate technologies and how we actually integrate those into a very powerful tool.
Yeah, so those are all fantastic, very futuristic ideas when you get into blockchain. And Kim and Ian, I'd love your thoughts on how this is going to work for both the farmer and the entrepreneur and the investor. 'Cause big ideas, great for scientists and maybe large companies, maybe harder to implement, maybe not at the farm gate. Kim, what's your perspective?
I think it creates an opportunity for farmers, right? I mean, right now we create a seed and we sell the seed and that's all we get from that. Now this creates an opportunity where we can even start to look at what is our seed being used for, what is our commodity being used for. It's not just a single use anymore, and that makes it more valuable as well. That also allows us to maybe look at our different cropping rotations that we're doing. We're under a lot of pressure to increase our diversity in our crop rotations, and this actually allows us to consider those different options that maybe we hadn't thought of before.
Right, and Ian, for an entrepreneur, but as well as an investor.
Sure.
How do you play?
I think it's going to be huge for smaller companies. Companies like to work on their own thing and are worried about competitors. And I think this clustering, this cluster concept is going to be an incentive to collaborate with other companies, and it'll be a synergistic effect where you get solutions that result that no one company would have done on their own.
And John, it's really important. It's private sector driven. I think that's really important, that there's an opportunity for, our farmers are entrepreneurs. So, we can't forget that we have tens of thousands of successful entrepreneurs in this province at the farm gate. And, collaborating with technology companies and food processors, the power of innovation, in this type of system with our University of Saskatchewan, Regina, SRC. I mean, we have, incredible facilities at our universities. This is going to be a generational project.
So, Murad, you talked earlier about ideas like drones on the farm, and that fits into IoT, the Internet of Things, and having devices on every farm with sensors that can measure pretty much everything, moving away from the pen and paper approach that Kim mentioned. Fantastic to talk about. Is that a reality yet on Canadian farms, and how far If not, how far away are we from having a significant IoT systems in Canadian farming?
I mean, this is not futuristic. I mean, the technology exists. We have to have the will, and we have to have an organized strategy to monetize. And I think that, one of the things that, my colleagues will also, I'm sure, add in is we have to figure out what we're measuring.
Yeah.
And then we have to figure out how to collect it, synthesize it, make it usable. But then, I do believe that it's very important to use things like, blockchain technology, to take data and to take that supply chain and actually make it a safe, reliable, traceable, sustainable supply chain right from the farm gate to the consumer. That is an extremely powerful opportunity for this country.
Can you explain a bit how blockchain would work on a farm?
It's interesting because we talk about pen and paper. I mean, really right now, the entire reliability system in the world is still so reliant on third-party validation and pen and paper. And, blockchain takes that pen and paper and makes it a digital ledger. And so from that digital ledger, you can't change it, right? You can't tamper with it. You can't, make it suit the purpose that you're looking to make it suit. So the reliability of a blockchain-enabled system, gives the consumer and the retailer and the regulator the ultimate security that that food chain is as we presented it. And I think that, that's how we're going to win the race, is that already Canada has an image as a food-safe, technology-rich, brand-rich country. Blockchain is the future for us.
So the idea is if I'm buying peas or lentils in Asia, I can scan it or use my own device to know where it was grown, when it was grown, maybe who it was grown by?
And everything that we say about it, whether we get to a carbon footprint index on it, we'll be able to not only measure it, but assure that chain. We'll know where it came from. We'll know where it was handled. In the case of a recall in food safety, we'll know all the information in the chain on that reliably. So, again, data becomes a powerful tool for management, but I think it will create the value. And one of the challenges at the farm gate is that we want them to do it, but what's the value to the farmer? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, they need a higher price, and they need a return for the effort. And I think that that's what we're going to get.
Is this going to guarantee higher prices forever, or are we just going to continue to live in cycles,
I think
peaks and
that
valleys?
we need to join the race and win it, and then we need to keep training to make sure that we keep winning the gold medal.
So one of the challenges with blockchain and really any technology, but blockchain specifically, is getting a universe of contributors. People, a critical mass of people have to be willing to share their data. And Kim, I want to get your thoughts on the challenges and opportunities for farmers to share their data. And I'm sure both of you in the work you're doing face that challenge. How do you convince farmers to sign off on privacy waivers, to share their data, and then to work with their data? What's the biggest challenge?
I think right now it's understanding how that data is even being used. So we're at the forefront of collecting that data. And that's one thing that we're looking at for IoT and farming, is we're just at the forefront and we're just kind of cracking the surface on what IoT can mean, and as far as that collection of data. And I think the next step is understanding how that data is actually going to be used. Because I think that is what is creating sort of that barrier for farmers to being wanting to share it, is they have no idea what's going to happen with that data and if it's actually going to benefit them. That's a huge unknown. So it's hard for me as a farmer to say, yeah, go ahead, here's my data, when I have no idea how it's going to be used, if it's going to harm or benefit my business.
Right. Ian, what are the challenges you're seeing, and what should farmers be worried about in terms of sharing their data?
With our business, we haven't seen a whole lot of pushback and concern about it. It's not that it never comes up, but I think in general, yeah, farmers do have a right to ask these questions, but I think overall, we live in a society where we're kind of giving away information about ourselves all the time through Facebook and whatever else. I think it needs to be made clear to farmers how the data is going to be used and what benefits that's going to result in back to them.
Right. Now, you were just in Germany. What sort of advancements are you seeing there? What should we be worried about, or what should we be excited about in terms of what's happening in ag tech elsewhere?
Well, it was an amazing experience being over there. That was our first time attending or exhibiting, and the thing you notice is just the volume of manufacturers is so much higher than it is here, and they did seem, from my perspective, to be adopting technology kind of as table stakes for a lot of them. And I think the electronic solutions we have to look at as, well, look at this. This is all pretty sophisticated stuff. There's companies doing beacons, like a machine manufacturing doing beaconing for tracking their machines, won an innovation award. And I think it's a competitive market over there, and that's causing a lot of innovation. The other thing is they do a good job of data interoperability. They have initiatives to get all these machines to talk together, and this is another problem that we face here and farmers face. There's just so many solutions out there right now, and Kim had talked about that. Well, they don't talk to each other, and it drives farmers crazy because they want to use this tool from this vendor, that tool from that vendor. Why can't they talk together? And I think they're doing some good things in Europe, and I think with the supercluster initiative, we can potentially solve some of these issues here too.
Is there a simple solution to getting equipment to talk to each other?
It's not a simple solution, no. And I know with our business, we have connections to other software companies, and it's a hard problem. And I think it needs a lot of bright minds to come together to solve it in a way, because every company builds their own software with their own kind of conceptual models, and then they just don't mesh. And it's going to be hard work to solve the problem. I think it's going to be a necessity.
So that doesn't happen only in farming?
Yes, I agree.
I think every business would recognize that and know that there's no magic bullet to addressing it. You also mentioned in a previous conversation that the Europeans are moving to smaller equipment. I wonder if you see that happening here anytime soon.
Well, it's interesting, like with this DOT project, that the farm automation, it's a very small implements, and I think the trend is bigger, more land, bigger machines, but there should be some thought about, well, how efficiently are we harvesting, for instance? If you're throwing a bunch out the back end of the combine, well, why are you farming more land? Maybe you can slow down and put more of the grain in the hopper and be more efficient about our use of the land. And I think in Europe, they don't have big farms, so they eke every last bushel per hectare, or whatever you'd call it, out of the land.
Does that give them a competitive advantage? In other words, are we perhaps cursed by our abundance, certainly abundance of land?
It's possible, yeah. I think when you have abundance in any industry, it's easy to ignore the efficiencies if times are really good. And I think those are the times you need to remain vigilant, and so you can protect yourselves during times of down cycles. We've been fortunate here. In the U.S., it's been a lot tougher. I think we've been helped out by the dollar quite a bit. In the U.S., they haven't had that benefit, and we definitely see a difference in our business between our U.S. customers and Canadian.
So we've got a favorable currency, as you say, and we also have some favorable trade agreements. And a question here from the audience that maybe, Murad, you can speak to about trade agreements and their importance to all that we've been talking about. Saskatchewan, I believe, was just with the STEPS mission in Europe. Important conversation there, possibly a conversation emerging with China. We all know about the conversation with our southern neighbor. How much of an advantage or disadvantage do we have today in terms of our trade agreements, and how much more should we be looking for on the trade front?
Well, I think that the multilateral trade agreement side with the U.S. administration's current position is probably not high on everyone's agenda. So even as Canada, we've said in the next round of TPP that we need to see how NAFTA plays out before we decide what our position is. And I think that what that leads me to is the importance of bilateral free trade agreements. We're able to then take away all those other external pressures and focus on exactly what's important to our agenda. And I think that the Canada-Europe trade agreement will be a material agreement for agriculture. I think that the access for value-added food products, Europe is an extremely protected market, where quotas and duties and other things are very prevalent. But with a food-safe, high-quality, tariff and duty-free access for Canadian agri-products, as we move up the value chain, Europe's going to become important. The China and India agreements, I think, are very, very key. At the end of the day, tax-free, tariff-free, duty-free, non-tariff trade barrier, elimination we'll have free flow of agri-products, going into the key markets that we need. And, we can't ignore, John, 10 billion people. We have to produce as much food in the next 40 years as we have to produce that we produced in the last 10,000 years of civilization. And Asia is the driver. And I think that, again, that agreement with China and India, an agreement with ASEAN for Canada, are critical trade agreements that will affect the prosperity of agriculture and the prosperity of Canadians in general.
So if we get those trade agreements, particularly with Asia, how do farmers and ag tech players in Canada need to change? What do they need to do differently to take advantage of those opportunities? Kim?
I think on the farmer side, if we need to embrace those agreements and adjust what we do on the farm accordingly. So, I mean, these trade agreements that come down, they do affect the farm gate because they affect what we plan on doing the next year and the year after that. And we need to be able to be nimble enough to respond accordingly and also pay attention to what's happening in the world beyond just Canada and beyond just our local areas as well.
Ian, how would you suggest we need to change at this end?
Well, I think we need to think about more than just our own market, and we need to work hard at doing trade in these regions. Do things like what STEP facilitates in Germany to help smaller companies get into markets or help us exhibit in a kind of an expensive trade show to try to get us thinking about how do we get into Europe. I think we need to do the same thing to South America, to Asia, because it's easy to think about just your own backyard, and that's where you really need to start as a small business. But you need to be looking to the rest of the world because the barriers are, well, generally they have been retreating, and there's a lot of talk about protectionist policies right now. But I think overall we're gonna have to have open trade between countries, and all companies need to think about their competitors, not just in their own local market, but globally.
And John, I think that it's very important for the farmer and for the farm gate to have predictability. And I think that that's one of the things that we're actually we need a recognition that we are involved in agriculture and food, which is one of the most political businesses in the world. We're talking about food policy, food security, food availability, and food inflation in emerging markets. Governments are elected and defeated by food policy. And so, what free trade agreements do is give us that layer of predictability, for the regulatory environment on an import basis. And I think that, that's the most critical message to our government is that not only vigilance, but speed, in terms of getting these agreements done, not hurrying to get a bad deal. But I think it's very, very important for us that bilateral free trade agendas, we're losing ground to Australia and to others who have moved faster than we have in Asia.
So a related question perhaps here from the audience that bridges both technology and trade. This is on bulk handling and what changes we need in bulk handling, especially as we think about technologies like blockchain. It's fine if you have large companies, the global multinationals playing in this, and the scientists and the farmers, but if we don't have this technology embedded in bulk handling, or don't have a different approach to bulk handling, it perhaps isn't going to work. You're smiling there, Murad.
Well, I think that
what are your thoughts?
The bulk handling system in general in the world is based on what we would call fair average quality. I mean, it's all about handling on the lowest cost basis, and quality specifications in bulk handling in the world have been brought down, and I think that has been to the detriment of the farm gate. I think that now today, if you're growing a durum wheat that has a high vitreous kernel count, but it's a number 3, you get paid a number 3, and nobody gives you the benefit of the characteristic that really matters to a pasta producer. And so I think that when we embed in technology, we embed in traceability, what it's going to do is it's going to up the bulk game. I think that a lot of countries are going to demand more processing of bulk commodities. I mean, pests of concern, weed seeds, and pests are at the height of phytosanitary policy in the world. And when we dump farmer-dressed product that isn't processed at all onto vessels and ship them around the world, we're putting our agricultural chain at risk. And I don't think that farmers want that long term. And so I think that our system has to change.
How do you foresee that or envision that affecting farmers? If that technology is in place and consumers have much better information, how does that blow back to the farm gate?
Well, it's what I said about being the lowest common denominator competitor, or one that competes on a quality differentiated basis. I mean, countries like Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan, they are so far behind in infrastructure that today they're having trouble even competing with us as the lowest common denominator. But if we up our game into technology, we're so far ahead that we'll actually differentiate ourselves entirely. And I think that, we have to understand one thing: the market's growing, right? It's going to be 10 billion people by 2050. So, the 2 or 3 billion that we might be serving today, we might be happy to leave those behind and move on to the next 2 or 3 billion. I mean, it's staggering to think of the scale of what we're talking about in terms of growth. So why aren't we looking at, today, the 3 billion consumers in the world that are, the most important to Canada? Let's move up the income scale and focus on those 3 billion as they get wealthier. That's the game.
Kim, a question for you also from the audience on entrepreneurs and what Saskatchewan and Saskatoon and Regina need to create a Silicon Valley of ag tech. All that we're talking about is fantastic, but if you leave it just to large companies, farmers, and maybe scientists, it's probably not going to work if you don't have entrepreneurs developing new systems, new products like you're doing. What do we need in Saskatchewan to create a Silicon Valley?
So I think in Saskatchewan in particular, we tend to focus on the large companies. And we don't really give a lot of credit to the smaller companies. And it's typically the smaller companies that you're going to actually see driving that innovation. So I think there's a couple things we need. We need society in our province to recognize the innovations that are being driven by these smaller companies and creating the support around those companies to be able to stay in Saskatchewan and build. Secondly, there's also probably a layer of government support in there. And then there's also a layer of support from the larger companies in recognizing how much these smaller players do play into their success as well. So I think it's a building of an ecosystem that allows for these companies to start in Saskatchewan, flourish in Saskatchewan, and stay in Saskatchewan, because I think that is really important, and that's not an experience that Farm at Hand had. We did actually go out of province, and we built our company in Vancouver, and it actually remains there today. So that was actually a missed opportunity for our community.
Why did you go to Vancouver?
We had an opportunity to attend a tech accelerator. And that is basically, they bring in companies and they sort of teach us the business of running a business. They teach us about investment. And that was something we couldn't get in Saskatchewan. And the reason why we couldn't get that in Saskatchewan, it didn't exist. And also there wasn't the investment network either in Saskatchewan. That is somewhere that we need to kind of run to catch up right now, and also open up the doors for investors to be able to invest in our local companies and not be looking elsewhere and not sending companies outside the province to grow.
John, part of the supercluster process will also be, we're looking at in our application around $200 million of venture capital, and there will be actually incubators and accelerators developed for agriculture technology. And we'll also have a very strong focus on small enterprises, women-owned businesses, Aboriginal, Indigenous businesses. So, the recognition of that ecosystem need for small companies to be drivers of innovation, that's what the cluster process is all about. It's taking those large and small and creating the scale. Because I think that once we've created the innovation, in order to drive it, it takes money. So, you need the large companies, to do that. But we also want larger Saskatchewan companies and Manitoba and Alberta companies to drive that innovation.
Ian, you're an entrepreneur. What's your perspective? Is it as simple as getting a large pot of money into the ecosystem, or will there be more that's needed?
I think education is a big piece in terms of educating the next generation of engineers and software developers, at least from the technology side, because that's certainly a challenge for any company in Saskatchewan, is finding and retaining the talent, and that's kind of a long-term thing. The other thing is I think a cultural change, and I think it's happening where it's becoming more okay to fail. Like, you need to be able to be okay with failing as an entrepreneur, and I'm not sure in this province that that's always been been okay. I know I got some strange looks when I started the business, like you're crazy, and I think we need to be, I think the American culture, they're sort of built for this, and failing is a badge of honor, and I think we need to embrace that too. And the other thing, is the support for the small businesses, and I know there's an incubator that started up just this year called Collabs that I've had the privilege of being able to participate with on their board. And Jordan, who's running that, is full of so much energy, getting these new entrepreneurs to point it in the right direction. And I think that is the sort of thing. And if we get more incubators and accelerators through the supercluster, this is the kind of infrastructure we need in place. And the investment dollars are coming here. Like Coconut Calendar, they just did a good round just a week or two ago. I think the mentality is changing that, and Seven Shifts is another example, that, we can invest in these companies and they can stay in Saskatchewan. The first company I worked for, we raised venture capital, but we had to go to Ottawa as part of the deal. And I think I'm seeing this shift, and we got a long way to go, but I think we're heading the right direction.
So VC funding has been on the decline. Has it turned the corner?
I'm probably not the best person to speak to this because we've been a self-funded company and haven't been seeking venture capital. I think there's still big deals happening all the time, and maybe they're getting larger and fewer. And I'm not talking specifically in Canada, but in the U.S. there's a lot. But maybe Kim or Murad can.
Yeah, so I think when we look at the decline, we can't just look at that in isolation. We really have to look at what's been happening before that and what companies have been doing. So back when we started Farm in Hand, ag tech wasn't a thing. It wasn't a term. But shortly after that, Monsanto bought the Climate Corp. And then all of a sudden, ag tech was the new biggest, greatest thing, and everyone wanted to be in it. You had companies springing up out of nowhere and hundreds of millions of dollars of VC funding flowing through these companies. However, what we've seen is that while these companies have built the coolest of technology, their business model hasn't exactly translated into a return that a VC would typically like to see. So what we're seeing is that instead of investing in new seed companies or new startups, they're actually doing the follow-on funding to help those companies grow. And that's not necessarily uncommon either as a sector does mature. And I think we're seeing other people kind of waiting on the sidelines to seeing how these early deals pan out before we see more injection of investment into that early and seed stage. But if you look at other regions of the world like Asia, where the life cycle of ag tech is relatively early, you are seeing that infusion and that investment activity, and you're seeing the accelerators popping up to support those early seed stage companies in agriculture.
Are we expecting too quick a return? Is that what you're suggesting in ag tech?
Well, I think it comes back to the point that we're still in the stages of figuring out what we're doing in ag tech. I mean, we're still in the data collection. We have not realized the vision of a lot of these companies. We still don't have a return on investment to the farmer in a lot of cases. And I think that's making it difficult for these venture capital funds to be able to see their return, and that maybe isn't something that they're used to.
Murad, you spent a lot of time in Asia. Do you see a big difference in their approach to both ag tech and funding through VC investing or other channels?
Yeah, I just think that there's a lot more risk tolerance, I think, and the Canadian investing institutional investor mentality has been very cautious relatively, I think, but I think that's changing. I think that ag tech specific funds, I think are really quite exciting and a recognition. I was with one of Canada's great entrepreneurs, Arlene Dickinson, recently, and she's investing in women-owned agricultural businesses that are in the technology space in Calgary in an incubator, and those types of the smart money coming in. I think that that's going to show, and that track record that Kim's talking about is going to lead to an acceleration of the placement of capital. And I think that the Asia side, it's always supercharged. And I'm not sure necessarily that gets you a faster result all the time. I think that we need a plan. And I think that again, a focus on what we're good at, how we monetize the entire supply chain, and use technology in that, I think that's going to be the winning recipe. And I think that, capital is not going to be the constraint here. It's actually the organization of the strategy, the innovation focus, and then the connectivity of the pieces into a cohesive, commercialization strategy. Then the capital is going to flow.
Yeah, one of the things we see in other sectors is capital is rarely the challenge. The bigger challenge is what we call smart capital. It's getting people who have been through the battles, who have failed, who can work with entrepreneurs, put their money in, but also put their brain power and their networks, their human networks in. And that's why good accelerators are, in fact, accelerators. They accelerate the success of others. So it sounds like you're on the right track with that. A good question here from the audience about the labor challenge. Labor shortages are often a curse of this province. Is technology going to solve that, or is technology helping to address that in any meaningful way currently?
I think on the farm it is. When we look at projects like DOT and autonomous farming, that does free up someone from being in the field in that cab. And farm labor is always an issue. Finding labor in a remote or rural areas is tough to do. And people that could be making more money working in other parts of the province. So it's hard to recruit those people and have them stay. So I think if we can look at how we use technology in freeing up our time so we can spend time on our businesses where it makes the most impact, I think that'll be a huge win for technology in ag.
We're talking a lot about data and stuff, but I think that, in the processing side, technology is certainly helping us with our labor challenge, and, robotics and automation. We want, very skilled, well-paying, non-seasonal jobs, and that's what, the young people want as well. And, so, we've got an initiative in our factories to look at, automation systems and efficiency and scale that I think, again, it makes us more competitive too, John. I think it's important to recognize that the robots aren't going to displace workers. It's going to move them into different roles and functions. And I think that's a really important recognition that we have to have.
What changes do we need in the education system, not just for, say, youth coming into the workforce, but for people who are advanced in the workforce? What changes do we need to learning and to education to address those opportunities?
I think that one of the advantages we have in this province is that our universities and our polytechnique are very plugged into industry, compared to what we may see in larger jurisdictions. And, I think there's a real willingness from the leadership within our educational institutions. But, that education happens even earlier than post-secondary. And I think that, we've got some very positive things like, Ag in the Classroom has been very effective. I think that, we need to ensure that right at the elementary and high school levels that business programs are focusing on agribusiness careers and international trade and the internationalization of our economy. These are all things. I mean, in Europe, we see families, when a child speaks only one additional language, they're a disappointment. I mean, here we celebrate if our children can speak English well. So, we're at a disadvantage, and I think that is a cultural disadvantage for us, but we should be the opposite because we're one of the most culturally diverse countries. And I think that, we're a country built on immigrants. We have an incredible opportunity to engage the diaspora of the world, to penetrate world markets. And, I think that has to be a real focus over the next 40 years for us.
That's a great point. Kim, a question here from the audience about getting more women into not just farming, but ag tech.
Right. So I think the best thing about ag tech is it actually takes the gender out of what we're doing in agriculture. Technology used, whether it's in business or on the farm, it actually is gender neutralizing. So I don't necessarily have to be the most mechanically inclined anymore. I don't have to be the strongest. I don't have to be able to lift the most, but my skill set is now very useful on the farm. And in terms of ag tech, I think it's just more role models, more people that I can look across that boardroom table and I can say, that's me. That looks like me. And more people like maybe myself taking the time to become those role models for other women that might want to be involved and helping them understand some of their strengths as well as how they can use those strengths to overcome some of the barriers that they might see.
So just on this point of future skills, we've got another question from the audience about skills of the future for farming. And Ian, I wonder if you could speak a bit to this. What should people be thinking about in terms of future-proofing, if we can call it that, future-proofing their careers and their lives to deal with these fantastic but very sometimes challenging forces of technology and international trade?
Well, I think that we live in a completely different world, and my children are growing up just with technology around them. But I don't think that that means that they really understand what technology is. They're just used to using it. And I think the danger we face is that the technology gets more and more separated from most people, and the percentage of the population that actually understands how it works gets smaller and smaller. And I think it's important for education to really delve into how this actually works. And not that everyone needs to be a software developer, a technologist, but an appreciation for what it is, and the fact that it's not magic, even though it's very, very complex. But I think having more of a fundamental understanding of how it works will allow people to adapt to a changing, economic landscape.
Right. Murad, another question from the audience that maybe you can speak to. This is about the preference for local food. How do you see that affecting Saskatchewan?
Well, I think that listen, it's a trend that I think is going to be irreversible, and I think that we'll have local food ecosystems that will develop very successfully in our province. To serve geographies and regions. I think one of our challenges with that, in Saskatchewan in particular, is we have 1.2 million people, and we have such a large productive capacity that we're actually relying on the fact that markets outside of our province need our products. But I think that urbanization of agriculture, into closed agriculture in cities, we will see more in population centers. I mean, there's initiatives now to repurpose empty warehouses and office buildings in downtown cores, in populated cities into market gardens and other things that can serve the restaurant and food service trades in a downtown core, where you're growing vegetables in a greenhouse environment in an old office tower, and you're harvesting those and putting them into trucks that are only delivering a few blocks, right, instead of delivering a few 100 miles. So these local food systems, I think that there's legs to that. There's people want to know where their food comes from. So I think that right now one of the preferences for local is because we can't actually deliver them an ability to know where their food came from when it travels a long distance, right? And that's where, again, I think that we come back to blockchain and safe, reliable food chains, where we'll actually spread we'll satisfy the desire using technology instead of having it grown so locally.
So we as Canadians like to think our food is safe and will be seen as safe around the world. Is that the case? Do others in the world see Canadian food
definitely. Listen, our reputation in the world as Canada is we have a safe, reliable food system. So I think that we can take that reputation and the Canadian brand, and we can really up our game in a big way and use technology to create a barrier to entry that will prove the traceability, reliability, and safety of our brand. So it's already there, but resting on your laurels of a brand on anecdote alone, Sean, doesn't give you a barrier to entry for somebody else to come in.
That's where technology becomes
Absolutely.
the barrier to entry.
Technology it can create a massive, large, quick barrier. But I think that, again, you can't rest on that laurel. You got to keep innovating.
Right.
And I think that's our opportunity.
So just as we move towards wrapping up, we've got a good cheeky question here from the audience. You've all talked about the importance of failure, and in Silicon Valley, you haven't really succeeded until you've failed, as you say, Ian. This person would like to know about your own failures, and if you could speak to maybe identify one, and especially in the farming and ag tech space, and what you learned from it.
Sure. Yeah. So for me, there's a string of them. And mainly trying to do projects. So I wanted to start a business for a long time, so I tried different side projects, and none of them did anything. and I spent a lot of time on them, and I don't ever want to add up the total dollar value. So I think what I learned through that is, yeah, you can't do it. It's no half measures. You have to go all in. So when we started our company 5 years ago, we did it full time, my business partner and I. And so I think I learned certainly from my mistakes, and the one was you can't have a paycheck to fall back on. At least I can't. I need to have my entrepreneurial endeavor be the source of my of putting food on the table, or it's not going to happen.
Right. Kim?
One of the biggest challenges for me when we were building Farm in Hand was actually the team and the people. And I think I probably failed at that every day for quite a few days until I learned that even though I might be one of the founders, I didn't have to know it all. And that was a really big learning for me, was that we had brought our team together because they were all smarter than Himanshu and I. And that's what we were going to be able to build our team on. So I really had to sort of step back, understand that I didn't have to know everything. And at the time, that felt like failure, to have to go to my team and say, you know what, I don't know how to be the best project manager because I've never done it before, but I'm doing it today. So it was about asking a lot of questions, accepting that I was probably going to fail every day, and then sort of embracing it and almost running with it and using it to my strength rather than using it to my detriment, and learning to rely on the team that we had built around us.
That's a great observation, and one of the many reasons women tend to be very successful entrepreneurs as well as leaders. So all the more reason to push the points you were making earlier, and finding people who are willing to admit they don't know everything, and we'll build teams that do. Murad, can you share a bit of insight from?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I learned early on in my journey, I did a lot of acquisitions, and turning companies that aren't successful around is a really big challenge. So, I abandoned that strategy early on and decided that I wanted to buy successful companies and make them even more successful. And I think that, that was one. And the second one that comes to my mind is the difference between, inventing technology and solutions versus developing process engineering solutions. And what I mean by that is, we learned early on that we could actually scour the world for the best technologies, and when we put them together in a processing system, we could create a proprietary process engineering solution that actually probably gave us a quicker time to market, more probability of success, and it could create a very big barrier to entry, because we could take pieces of that and slip them out and slip new ones in as we saw innovation around us. And I think that was a recognition that's really led us to have, kind of a world-class, quality and process management infrastructure in the world. Is, we didn't design things and invent them. I mean, I have engineers that want to do it every day, and I don't let them. So I stifle the innovation and tell them to focus on, the fact that, companies in our industry, like, Buehler Technologies in Europe, they're one of the best manufacturers of optical color sorting technology in the world. Why would I try and develop my own scanning technology? I'm going to take that, use it in my process. And I think that, recognition of how to utilize technology is actually a very important aspect of how you succeed with it.
Another question here from the audience about foreign investment. We are pursuing a lot of foreign investment across the country, but it becomes more contentious at times when it's put into farmland. How much more foreign investment or less should we be seeking in Saskatchewan to help flourish or see flourish all that you're talking about, Murad?
I'm a free marketer, so I will be the wrong person to ask. To me, foreign capital coming in is a good thing. I don't believe that always leads to, the exit. I think there's a lot of synergies we can gain from it. So, I'm not opposed to foreign investment in anything. I don't think we should have restrictions like that. I mean, national security interests, those things, but government intervention in foreign investment stifles it for a long time.
Yeah. A related question here about winner-take-all in technology. We're seeing across a number of sectors the emergence of sort of the Amazon model of a single company that develops a winning model and then takes it to scale globally, and they take the prize. Are we going to see that in ag tech, Ian?
I'm not sure, but there's a few companies that you'd look at, Climate Corp being one, and some others, Farmers Edge, that are pursuing similar models. And I think there's certainly a lot of consolidation, and I think it could certainly happen where you just get this snowballing effect and you get one dominant player. I think we should strive to be part of this and not have it just dominated by one, multinational. I think we have a lot of skills in Canada that should position us to take part of this. But yeah, I think this is the trend. Everything gets consolidated in every industry. Agriculture and tech is no different.
Kim, how concerned should we be about this, and should we try to resist it in any way or just let the free market prevail?
Mm-hmm. I don't think that we're going to have just one major player. I think it'll play out like everything else has in ag, where we have kind of the top companies in inputs, we have the top companies in equipment, we have the top buyers as well. And I think we'll probably see that same thing happen with ag tech. And while that may happen, we will have the big players. We're always going to have the new businesses popping up, the new companies popping up, and forcing that change within what can sometimes become a bit of a stagnant industry. So while I think we should be mindful of it, I don't think that we should be worried or fighting it or anything like that. I just think we should realize that it's probably going to happen, but then keep innovating on the other side as well.
Rod?
I think that the ability to take all of these different systems that are going to be developed by the entrepreneurs of the world and consolidate them into a usable platform is likely to come from someone. So I think that is where I see the consolidation happening. Is that a farmer doesn't want to have 12 different systems operating on their farm. Yeah. At some point, it all has to be collected, synthesized, and go into a data hub type system, and all of those things I think will have to happen by a much smaller number of players. Otherwise, at the end of the day, the efforts don't yield us the benefit and the return. And so I think that the ecosystem is going to develop where the small companies will develop, but I think that the roll-up and the usability may have to come from the scale.
So unfortunately, we're running short of time, and I'd like to turn to you for a final question about what farming and ag tech is going to look like 5 or 10 years from now, and how Canada can be a winner in that environment. Murad, maybe we can start with you. If you look 10 years out, how's farming going to be different from today, and how does Canada ensure that it's successful and prosperous in that environment?
I mean, digital agriculture is our future. Food safe, traceable, reliable food systems, to meet that growing income in the world. That's the spot that we need to occupy. And I think that, our agriculture, as a result of technology and predictability and traceability, the food value-added sector in this country is going to be much larger than it is today. And I think that that's an incredibly exciting decade to come.
Kim, what's going to be different 10 years out? How do we succeed?
Right. So I think the beauty of farming is it's this mix of low tech and high tech. And I don't think that we'll ever get away from having one or the other. I think it'll always be a mix. And while, we're a business and there's millions and millions of dollars that flow through our industry, at the end of the day, what makes our industry so amazing are the people behind this industry. So I think as we look forward, we have to realize that we can't lose focus on the people behind our industry, because they will be the ones that keep driving our industry forward. And so it's really about how do we keep that relationship between tech and people in a way that it's beneficial to both and it recognizes both.
Great. Ian, what's going to be different a decade out?
Well, I think there'll be a lot more automation, so it'll be interesting to see how quickly that propels. Certainly focus on more and more data collection and focusing on good data collection, and then all of the machine learning, AI, predictive analytics that's going to be built on top of that to really find out solutions to problems in new ways and in automated ways. I think it's going to change farming a lot. The timeline's hard to predict exactly, but 10 years is a long time.
Great. Well, for our audience here and our audience watching remotely, I hope you can mark your calendars for our next Disruptors, which will be December 13th. We're going to be talking about electronic gaming and how it's changing the leisure industry and the sports industry in particular. So that's December 13th. You can watch us on Facebook if you can't join us in person. And before we go here, I'd like to mention that as a token of our appreciation, a donation is being made to the charities of choice of our panelists, to the Canadian Mental Health Association for Kim, the Foundation for Fighting Blindness for Ian, and Canadian Red Cross for Murad. And if you don't mind, I wonder if you could each just say a word about why you selected those charities. So first with you, Kim.
Right, so if anyone knows me, they know that I am a big advocate for a more open conversation around mental health and working towards an industry that is free of stigma around getting help for mental health and mental illness. So that's why I've chosen to donate to the Canadian Mental Health Association.
Great, that's wonderful. Ian?
So I had a really hard time choosing. There's so many things that I wanted to donate to, but I ended up ultimately decided the Foundation Fighting Blindness. This affects family members, so I understand what it's like. It's to have these degenerative retinal diseases. And because I'm a technology person, I've seen a lot of innovation where there's actually solutions on the horizon. So it seemed like a good thing to where some more money towards it could actually get to a concrete solution.
Great. Murad, the Red Cross.
The Canadian Red Cross Imagine No Bullying School campaign is one of the most impactful programs that I see in this province, reaching over 32,000 school-age children, empowering them to fight back against bullying, both physically and in social media. So very, very important for the health and welfare of our children.
Great. Well, the three of you are certainly, you're inspiring entrepreneurs, you're inspiring Canadians, and those comments going to show that you're inspiring humans as well. So thank you for your compassion, your foresight, and your leadership in agriculture and in ag tech. It's going to be amazing to watch what happens here in Saskatchewan in the years ahead, especially with the advancements in technology, the opportunities for investors and farmers to work together and to reach out to the world. As Murad was saying, the next few decades are going to be profound in terms of the planet's relationship with food, and there's probably no region better suited than the Canadian prairies to take that on and do it positively and progressively. So on behalf of RBC and on behalf of the audience, let me thank you for a wonderful, inspiring, challenging conversation, and wish you all a great time here at Agri-Business, and thank the audience for joining us here this morning. Thank you.